It's November 10th. It's Wednesday. Thanks for hanging out with us here on Real Talk Jesperson with Hoyles and Brooks. This show is presented by our friends at Bitcoin Well. I was driving just south of our home city yesterday, hitting the highway for a bit of a cruise. And what did I see? But a big Bitcoin Well billboard on the side of the highway. I mean, yeah, sure, you can grow your staff by 400% over 1 year and increase your revenue by 250% over 3 years and wind up on the Globe and Mail's fastest growing companies list and win a top 40 under 40. But when you have a highway billboard, you know people are talking about what you're doing. If you have questions about Bitcoin, my recommendation, talk to the team at Bitcoin Well under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Before I say anything on the show this morning, before I do anything on the show this morning, I want to make sure that everybody that checks out this episode of Real Talk realizes this was prompted by a conversation I had yesterday with an audience member. You were so appreciated. Someone that said, I love Real Talk. I don't have time to listen to 2 hours every day, obviously, so I pop in when I can every couple of days. And they said, you know, it'd be great. And I already knew what they were going to say, Hoyles. I knew they were going to say it would be great if I could just jump ahead to the interview I want to listen to. And I said, here's the thing. You can. It's so easy. So whether you're downloading our podcast or whether you subscribe to our YouTube channel, obviously for free, and are checking out our content on YouTube, just go to the description where it says show more. Oftentimes, go to the description. You'll see the time code there. It tells you exactly when every interview starts. You can click right on the numbers, especially on YouTube. They make it so easy. It'll jump you right to the start of the interview. I wanted to mention that because I think it'll help a lot of people make sure they can get into more content without shuttling back and forth. People are busy. We know that. It means a lot to us when people give us some of their time every day. We've got a lot to talk about today. Coming up in about 5 minutes time, maybe 10 minutes, we're going to check in. I'm looking forward to welcoming Dr. Ashley Nunes to the program out of Harvard Law, and Simon-Pierre Poulin, who actually reached out to the program, a journalist, a media producer, now heads the only French language newspaper in Alberta. I love that Simon-Pierre is based out of Alberta. It adds an extra layer of interest, of complexity, of nuance to our conversation around whether or not, you know what, it's not even really a conversation about whether or not Air Canada's CEO should have to be fluent in both languages. I mean, that's what everybody's talking about because of a moment in a media scrum a number of days ago, and we're going to show you that in just a second, of course. It's why we're talking about it, but really, it's a bigger picture conversation about bilingualism or trilingualism or what have you, different languages, cultures, how they're represented, celebrated, and supported across Canada. Now, we put out a Twitter poll yesterday, and I want to make sure that I mention this as soon as I can because you have just 29 minutes left if you want to chime in and influence the results of this Twitter poll. We asked you from our official Twitter account at Real Talk RJ, should Air Canada's CEO have to be fluent in Canada's 2 official languages? So far, just over 2,100 people, 2,154 people have chimed in. What, Hoyles? What are you smirking at? 2,100 people have chimed in.
I just love that we can actually see what you voted.
Yeah. Well,
ooh, transparency. I like it.
But I think I already said yesterday, didn't I? I think I'm already on the record saying I don't think so. But I'm also I want to roll the video first before I really get into this, because you and I were already having this conversation, and then you said to me what I always say to you guys, which was save it for the air. Save it for the air, because I started explaining to you my nuanced perspective. And I think that it'll be good to drive conversation on the show. So 2,157 people voted to this point with about 28 minutes left. 70%, 69.3%, 69%. Nice. 70% of you say no, Air Canada's CEO should not have to be fluent in Canada's 2 official languages. 30.7, 31% of you, let's say absolutely. Air Canada's CEO, Michael Rousseau, should have to be fluent, or whoever's the CEO of Air Canada should have to be fluent. And then, of course, we have to broaden this conversation. Okay, if Air Canada, then who else? Everybody knows the Prime Minister's got to be fluent in French and English, but what about your Member of Parliament? You know, what if you're from Saskatchewan, or what if you're from Manitoba, or what if you're from Nova Scotia? Or is it even offensive? It's probably a little bit offensive to Simon-Pierre, who will be joining us in just a little bit, who's from Alberta, for me to imply that if you're Tobin, that maybe your member of parliament shouldn't have to speak French or be able to operate? Does it change the circumstance because Mr. Rousseau, the CEO of Air Canada, lives in Montreal? I think it makes it a little bit more concerning is too judgmental of a word, but it makes it more interesting to me. It makes it a little bit more unfathomable to me that he's lived in Montreal for 14 years and doesn't have at least some working knowledge. I mean, I'm pretty rudimentary with regards to my French proficiency, and I could understand the question from the reporter. I'm not sure I'd be able to answer it very well. I think it's a little bit easier to kind of process what they're saying a little bit. You picking out key words that you remember from grade 11 French. I don't know how my response would be, but I find it unbelievable. You'll see the CEO doesn't even know what he's talking about. He sort of defers to his translator. And some of you will quite rightfully, I think, say, well, Jasperson, you just hit the nail on the head. He deferred to his translator. He had someone there that was able to, and when I say translator, it's also an Air Canada executive. It's not just a translator, but it was someone that was able to respond on behalf of the organization en français. So a great conversation. That's going to happen in just a little bit with Simon-Pierre and Ashley, and I'm looking forward to that. A little later on in the show, we're going to understand more about what's going on with Wet'suwet'en and the blockade and the occupation and tensions rising between a local activist group and the RCMP. A video was released on November 3rd. It's, would you agree with my assessment that it's a little uncomfortable to watch in the sense that, yeah, right? Like the temperature is way up over there, and I think more Canadians probably need to be paying attention to this. Mm-hmm. I look back to conflicts like and even I'm trying to pick my language, conflicts. I mean, people were experiencing conflict, but like in Oka, maybe people's memories are too short to remember that sometimes these things really turn. We've been talking about Fairy Creek. We're going to drop in on that part of BC, and we've reached out to two different perspectives on this one. One of them has sent us a statement, and one of them has made themselves available for interview. So that's coming up later in the show. We're going to take you out to the mountains for MyJasper Memories, and we're going to learn more about a really powerful film that's just been done. We're talking about harm reduction and the opioid crisis in a First Nation community, what prompted the filmmaker to embark on this journey. Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers will join us. That's coming up, and a lot more as news develops. So there's a lot to talk about today on the show. You had also picked out, which I know you're not like, you'll tolerate a little bit of hockey talk every once in a while, and I appreciate it. I mean, it kind of comes with the job. But you pulled a pretty powerful story from Carey Price, one of the great goaltenders of all time, one of the great Montreal Canadiens of all time, and that's sure saying something, who has not been with the team this year after their run to the Stanley Cup final. He issued a statement yesterday.
Yeah, he basically was acknowledging the fact that he is experiencing challenges, and he's been using, I don't know exactly what he's been using, but he's saying he has a problem and he's going to seek help. And I just thought just in the context of all the conversations we've been having about the NHL and making sure that people are supported, as well as other folks that are in notable positions, saying that they might have a problem and then not necessarily addressing it. This to me was just like, this is what leadership is.
Yeah. Yeah,
I was so impressed.
So people were wondering at the very beginning, is Carey Price experiencing a physical injury? And then is Carey Price? He said he was taking some time for mental health, and then now yesterday his statement. Over the last few years, I've let myself get to a very dark place, and I didn't have the tools to cope with that struggle. Last month, I made the decision to enter a residential treatment facility for substance use. Things had reached a point I realized I needed to prioritize my health for both myself and my family. Asking for help when you need it is what we encourage our kids to do, and it is what I needed to do. Hey, I mean, this guy's one of the top goaltenders. I mean, this guy, I guess what I'm getting at, is a hero to people. And despite what Charles Barkley said many years ago, I'm not your kid's role model. Athletes, and in my mind, the truly great ones, understand that their words have power and their actions have power. Back to Carey's statement, I'm working through years of neglecting my own mental health, which will take some time to repair. All I can do is take it day by day. With that comes uncertainty with when I will return to play. I appreciate all the overwhelming support and well wishes. I ask the media and our hockey community to continue to respect our privacy. Your support and respect of this so far has been a critical piece to my recovery, which is also something that people don't always say. They always say, thanks for respecting our privacy. Please respect our privacy. They don't always say your support and respect so far has been critical to my recovery. So, I mean, obviously, we applaud Carey Price. You feel for Carey Price. You know that you can add his name to the list of people that show great courage, confronting things that are standing in the way of them achieving their optimal mental health and being there when they need to be there for themselves and for family members and for people that count on them. The Montreal Canadiens, who are, and it's irrelevant. It's either relevant or irrelevant, depending on what you're talking about. The Montreal Canadiens that pay him about $11 million a year, and the fans of that organization that ran to the Stanley Cup final and then are really having a tough year right now. They're without Shea Weber as well, their star defenseman, an injury. He's probably going to retire earlier than people would have hoped, and that's difficult for that fan base. And they've got this star rookie. I promise I won't get too into it, Sarah, but this star rookie, Cole Caulfield, that came out of the U.S. and he is just a snipe. He's kind of, I don't know who to compare him to. Maybe Martin St. Louis back in the day. He's just this little spitfire. And they had high hopes for Cole Caulfield. They just sent him down to the minors. He's struggling. So it's been a tough year for on the ice for the team, and it's been a tough year for the fans in Montreal. And one of the things that Carey Price says in that statement there, like, with that comes uncertainty about when I'll be back to play. And you know what? Everybody close to Carey Price is going to be saying, don't worry about the hockey right now. You're not thinking about the hockey right now, right?
Well, if you don't have your mental health and your wellness, you don't have hockey.
You've got nothing. And basically he's saying it got to the point where I needed help. So what are you going to try to do? You want to try to win a few games on the road at the expense of your goaltender? You know what I mean? Doesn't make any sense. So amazing. I think for Carey Price to take that step, I think that it goes a long way in empowering other people. You want to talk about Montreal Canadiens fans or hockey fans? What about people in the fan bases that are going, hey, hey, me too. I don't mean to co-opt the me too. But what I'm saying is that me as well. I too struggle. People can come forward and say, you know what? Actually, if a guy like that can seek help, I can go seek help. I can go get well.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I'm not. I am hockey adjacent. I am aware.
Sure, you're aware of it. But
this is on my radar.
Yeah.
So that to me speaks so much of the caliber, of the level, and of the awareness, just his notoriety, and why that's significant and important.
Well said. Very well said. We're going to talk about bilingualism in business in Canada in just a second. First, I want to give a big shout out to our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park, who want to remind you that they've got their flamethrower burger ready to roll off the grill at any of their drive-thrus or in-house at Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road. This is the 100% all-beef patty topped with their fiery flamethrower sauce. I could do more with that. Their fiery flamethrower sauce. Pepper jack cheese, jalapeno bacon, tomato crisp lettuce, all in that warm toasted bun. Maybe pair it up with a blizzard, that new sea salt toffee fudge blizzard. Yeah. At the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Also, big shout out to our friends at Eden Landscaping. It's kind of funny. For a while, I was wanting to point out that Mike and his team at Eden Landscaping take the fall and winter months to work with their clients on developing plans, on putting the architecture, the landscape architecture together, and doing all the permitting and stuff like that. Sometimes you got to go get your real property reports and all this, and they do that. They can do that during the winter, and I know that because kind of that's what we're doing with them right now. And then they reached out to me and said, Jasper, don't forget, winter construction can continue as well. Gazebo, pergola. You want to put something special in for the family? Maybe some sort of an outdoor structure so you can barbecue outside during snowstorms? They can still do that for you. You can check them out online at landscapeedmonton.ca. Well, this is just a few days ago, what may have seemed like, kind of a benign, boring media interview. I mean, to be honest, how many of you, the CEO of Air Canada is taking questions from reporters? You'd be like, next, right? Netflix, let's go check out Real Talk on YouTube, pass. That was right up until this happened.
Comment fait-on pour vivre à Montréal pendant plus de 14 ans et parler un français qui est très approximatif?
Can you redo that in English because I want to make sure I understand your question before I respond to it.
Je préfère que votre attaché traduise.
Je pense qu'il a adressé la question de la langue un petit peu plus tôt aussi dans son allocution. Alors, si on peut passer à d'autres questions.
How can you live in Montreal without speaking French? Is it easy?
I've been able to live in Montreal without speaking French. And I think that's a testament to the city of Montreal as
Merci
well.
beaucoup. On va passer à d'autres questions.
All right, so that's the CEO of Air Canada, Michael Rousseau. How can you live in Montreal for 14 years and not speak French? I've been able to do it, and that's a testament to the city of Montreal. It got us talking. As mentioned, our Real Talk poll, unofficial, unscientific, on Twitter yesterday, asked you if he should, Air Canada's CEO, have to be fluent in both official languages. About 7 out of 10 of you said no. I know at least one of our guests is going to disagree with that because he tweeted at us yesterday. This in response to our poll. This is Simon-Pierre Poulin, who's a journalist. We're going to talk to him in just a second. Responded to our poll and said, I expect Air Canada to respect federal laws. They have a very poor track record at providing French services, even when it's required by law. Having a management team who publicly cares so little about French sends a very bad signal, in my opinion. Simon-Pierre went on to say on a more personal note, and context is key to understand why it's such a big deal in the French community. My Quebecois grandfather did not have access to higher education and high-paying jobs. For most of our history, bosses spoke English, workers spoke French. That from Simon-Pierre Poulin, a journalist, formerly a news producer for CBC French, Radio-Canada, and now heads the only French-language newspaper in Alberta, published continuously since the 1920s, Le Journal de Franco. Dr. Ashley Nunes is a policy director for R Street's competition policy, is a research fellow at Harvard Law School, previously led transportation policy assessments at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Really thrilled to welcome both of you to the program. Thank you for making time for us. Simon-Pierre, I'd love for you to go first. The context right at the end, you knew it was important. You said through our family's history, bosses spoke English, workers spoke French. Take us into it.
True. There was a long history, and that's one of the things that fueled the Quebec independence movement. You had social class based on language, and it fueled up so much conflict. Of course, things change now. I think I'm myself an example of a social mobility that exists now in this country because laws were passed, because the Constitution also grants the fact that French and English should be equal in this country. That's what Canada is about. But when you see things like the actions of Air Canada, and again, their poor track record on French language, start to ask yourself, what does bilingualism even mean? Are these just words on paper? Are they just, how do we make it happen? And you hear from a more personal note, you heard the guy, 14 years living in a French majority environment. His wife is Francophone. His mother is Francophone. If you don't have enough time to learn to speak and understand both your mother and your wife, it's not just a business problem, man.
Dr. Nunes, I really appreciated your column in the Globe and Mail. I enjoyed it. It made me think, and that's the whole point of it. Reads the headline, sure, it would be better if Air Canada's CEO spoke French, but it's not essential. Can you take us into the argument or how you're wrapping your mind around this controversy?
Well, thank you for having me. Please feel free to call me Ashley. A couple of things. Firstly, I don't think it would be better. I think it would be nice. But as I argue in the piece, Michel Rousseau isn't there to be nice. He's there to run a business. With regards to Air Canada's track record, in terms of how it treats its Francophone clientele, it's well documented that they have fallen short. If you look at complaints that come in, these are usually about 80 a year, right? I think that number probably underestimates, right? In all likelihood, the number of people who face challenges associated with taking this particular carrier. But that being said, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, if you as a consumer are flying Air Canada, do you prefer that the CEO speak French or be bilingual at least, or that the line workers that you interact with are bilingual? Currently, I think the estimate is somewhere between about 17 and 20% of Canadians are bilingual, give or take, right? Should all companies in Canada have a representational numbers in terms of the number of people who speak French and English? Should that representation continue on into Parliament? I'm not saying it shouldn't, I'm just suggesting that we have to ask ourselves important questions about, who speaks a given language, with what frequency they actually speak it, and how proficient they are in those languages.
Ashley, I appreciate those questions because I ask the same ones. And Simon-Pierre, I can tell that you're eager to take them on. So go ahead.
Well, it depends what your business is. I mean, if I go to Burger Baron and I ask for French fries, I will not give them attitude because they can serve me in French. It's a private business for sure, but their business is selling hamburgers. What is Air Canada's business? It's to bridge this country. It's to be a bridge between French majority places and Calgary and Edmonton. It's about uniting economical hubs. What are the economical hubs in the city, in this country? Places like Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. Montreal is their main hub. So no, I don't think it's a good business decision to alienate 20% of your customers. Air Canada has such an important and good brand name internationally because it uses the Canadian flag, and that comes with certain obligation.
Let me ask, Simon-Pierre, let me ask you this, and I want to be extremely clear. I grew up as an Alberta kid in the 1980s and 90s, and I recognize I would be one of those. Was I old enough to drive? I may have had the bumper sticker, "My Canada includes Quebec." I've always valued the French language. I find it to be beautiful. My mom was a French teacher, so I don't want you to take offense at my real talk on this.
Oh, go on.
But when you say and we attend the French festivals in town, and I want to be clear, I respect the culture and value it. But when you say, Air Canada's CEO, you don't want to alienate 20% of your customers. I'm not sure that the average customer is interacting with the CEO. I'm not sure that the average customer is going to have any exposure. I mean, to Ashley's point, would you rather have the flight attendants and ticketing agents be bilingual as opposed to the CEO? When you use that word alienate, are you more inferring to how people felt about the comments, or are you talking about a lack of access to doing business as a customer of Air Canada?
Well, two things. First, there is a backtrack. There's a track record of Air Canada not following the law. There's a law that says, we can debate about it, let's change the law for sure, but there's a law now that says Canada, you are legally obligated to provide proactive service in French, and they keep failing. Years after, they have more complaints than any other body, federal entities who are under that official language act. And they say, we have so many customers. It's normal that sometimes people will complain because there's such a huge numbers. Well, guess what? When you go abroad and you come back to the border, you'll have to speak with someone, and that someone will say bonjour, hi. They don't have as much complaint as Air Canada. When you go vote, I had trouble voting in French in Edmonton. It was not easy. But there's less complaints for the entire electoral process than for an average year of Air Canada's affair. So there's a big track record there. And again, the problem with me is you need to compare with other similar companies. If I take the train from Saskatoon to Edmonton, I can get served in French. I will be greeted with a smile and they will say bonjour, hi. WestJet, Alberta owned WestJet, they're not under the same regulation, they're not under the same linguistic obligation, and yet on regional routes in West Canada, I get better service in French. Sometimes they don't understand. Sometimes they're not proficient, but they will say, "Oh, pardonnez-moi, I will find someone.
But isn't that what the CEO did too?
Well, what I heard is a bit of contempt and arrogance, and if that leadership doesn't come from the top, what's the motivation for people on the ground, people who are providing service, to learn French? I think top leaders should set example. And again, just to come back to WestJet, I don't know if WestJet CEOs speak French. Honestly, I don't really care because I can get the service in French. And to add to the injury, let me just remind you that back in April, Air Canada went and begged for Ottawa's money. They got a bailout of $5.9 billion on top of all the additional COVID help. What did WestJet get? They got the normal COVID help package, but they couldn't reach a deal on such a bailout. So you go and beg for Ottawa's money, but you're not following Ottawa's policy on bilingualism. For me, it's an ethical problem. And yes, it's a business problem. You're bankrupt, you beg for help, you don't follow the rules, and you make attitude, and you're being arrogant to French media. That's not a good business decision for me.
Ashley, you write about this in the Globe. You say Air Canada is a business, and the goal of a business is to make money. How is that relevant to what we're talking about today? Can you develop that?
Well, a couple of things. To your guest's point about Air Canada being based in Montreal, let's be clear, Air Canada doesn't want to be based in Montreal. They would have left Montreal a long time ago. And the reason why they didn't is because during the Mulroney government, there was effectively a stipulation in place that said that if they privatized, they would keep their headquarters in Montreal and they would keep those jobs in Montreal. Right? Let's be very clear about this. If it was up to Air Canada, they wouldn't be based there. That's the first thing. To the second point about the CEO in his responses, effectively showing contempt for the French language, that is pure and complete speculation. It's speculative on your part. It would be speculative on my part as well to say he doesn't have contempt for the French language. I don't know. You don't know. With regards to whether or not consumers want to be spoken to in French, Francophones, presumably they do. I would see no reason why they would not. There is something that trumps that particular requirement, and it's called a cheap airfare. And it's the reason why every single year, lots of people from Quebec drive across the border, right, to New York, if they can get a cheaper fare. Clearly, speaking French matters to them, until they start considering the price of plane tickets. That's not a slight on them. It's how most consumers make decisions. But to suggest somehow that the fact that this one individual doesn't speak both of Canada's official languages, despite the fact that there is no legal requirement to do so. I understand the optics of it. With Simon-Pierre, I understand completely the optics don't look great. Frankly, he should have known better. Frankly, he gets paid the big bucks and, with PR people, et cetera, to train him on how to provide these types of responses. The optics do not look good. However, as a private citizen, as a private Canadian, he is afforded the right to communicate in one of two languages, official languages of Canada. With regards to what needs to happen and Air Canada's track record, I want to be very clear about this. Air Canada has more flights and covers more miles than any other Canadian carrier in general. It is certainly true that when you have that volume of consumers, you will see complaints regardless of what the language of instruction actually is. With regards to the bailout specifically, it's true that Air Canada, took a few $1 billion from the Canadian government. The Canadian government is a minority stakeholder. It's somewhere in the order of about 6.4, 6.5%. It's paltry. It's paltry. And just because the company takes money from the government doesn't necessarily imply that it has to do everything the government says, right? That's not the way the system actually works. So again, I'm in complete agreement with the Simon-Pierre that, look, this doesn't look good. But, I saw Francois Legault say, well, he's spitting in the face of people from Quebec. It's like, well, come on, let's be real here, right? Is Justin Trudeau spitting in the face of all Canadians because his Governor General doesn't speak French? And right? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, actually, I'm the one barging in, but I mean, let me add sort of another shovel full of coal onto this fire here. Canada's deputy prime minister, who happens to hail from Alberta, whether or not that's relevant, I don't know. She represents, of course, a riding in Toronto, but Chrystia Freeland has roots in Alberta, says that learning to speak French should become part of CEO Rousseau's performance review. What does that do to the dynamic of this when the deputy PM wades into the controversy?
With regards to Minister Freeland's comments, I thought they were quite unfortunate for two reasons. The first, as I mentioned previously, is that she serves on a cabinet where there are some cabinet members who don't speak French, not to mention the Governor General. There's a larger issue here. Michel Rousseau has business acumen, his training is in business, etc., which is why he was hired to run that particular airline. He does not speak French. Minister Freeland's portfolio currently, she's in charge of the finance ministry, right? Minister Freeland has no actual training in finance. Her degree is in Russian studies. Does the fact that she speaks French mean that we should overlook her lack of finance training to run the finance ministry? I don't think so. While I have deep policy disagreements with the minister, I consider her to be a capable, talented, and smart individual. What that means is that people like her should know better than to pass judgment on individuals whose qualifications in one way or another mirror her own.
I want to ask both of you, and Simon-Pierre, I want to give you a chance to respond to that too, but I'm really grateful that Ashley brought up Mary Simon. I'm grateful that he brought up Canada's Governor General because she's the first Indigenous person and certainly the first Indigenous woman to serve in that role. She may not speak French. I don't know if that's true or not. Ashley, I'll take your word for it, but I would guarantee you she's bilingual. And there's been some interesting spin-off conversations here that we've been having. I mean, French and English are Canada's two official languages for some people. I mean, you know, it depends on how you want to describe it or not. We'll get into video later from the Wet Sweatin' where, you know, people have different perceptions on who's in charge there too. Elected versus hereditary chiefs, ceded versus unceded territory, the authority of the RCMP. I mean, it seems like we're talking about a lot of things right now. So when I say the two official languages of Canada are French and English, and people say that's a fact, then you may hear from Indigenous people in Canada that will say, well, we beg to differ. So how does that work itself into the conversation, Simon-Pierre?
Should Indigenous language be more recognized? Should they get an official status? Should we revitalize them? Absolutely. And I wish we can do that. The Francophone historically had more political leverage and managed to change laws and institution in the Constitution. Those battles were fought and somehow won because it's laws right now. And that I think should appeal to every people who fight for social justice in this country. We explicitly protect already a minority in the Canadian Constitution. But how is this minority going? Not too well. The French minority community, including in Alberta, there's 86,000 people who speak French at home, but that it's hard to get service in school. It's hard to get childcare. It's not equal. So my point is that if we want to pretend that we can achieve a more inclusive society, this will have to come with laws, perhaps with changing the Constitution. Why not? But we already made this process and it's not super efficient for French. So I think that should be a big, big red flag.
Dr. Nunes, what do you think about that?
Well, I would not, venture to guess as to whether or not, the government wants to add an additional language. What I would say is the following. The challenge that businesses currently have, and I think Simon-Pierre is correct over here, is that we have a sort of a lukewarm approach to bilingualism, right? If you look at how the system is currently structured, the adoption of bilingualism largely favors middle to upper class Canadians who can afford to take these classes, unless, of course, you are in places like Quebec. What that means is that if we are actually looking to be a bilingual society, we need to start from the bottom up. We need to have all our kids in schools, right, learn French and English from the get-go. And until that actually happens, it's very hard to achieve what I think is language equality, which is a goal that I think does in fact have value. But unless the government is willing to actually commit to that, to invest the resources to ensure that no matter where you are, right, from Iqaluit to Vancouver to Surrey to Calgary, you can access services in English and French because everyone has been trained in English and French, not just a select few. There's a challenge there.
I completely agree with you. And I think most Albertans, or many Albertans do, because there are lineups in front of immersion schools. People want to bring their kids to immersion school, but there's a shortage of French teachers because it's too popular. Let me get very concrete here. Where do we train French teachers in Alberta? In the Campus Saint-Jean, which is under cuts from the UCP government. For their basic funding, they just want to maintain what they have, and it's a complete struggle. This campus is a gem. It's the only French-only majority campus in Western Canada. It's very precious, and that's where you train those teachers. The UCP government preferred to go to courts and pay more in legal fees than support the Campus Saint-Jean for what they were wanting. So I think it's a little bit ideological in this case. And you're right. It's a burden for people to learn French, and we need better quality French teaching. So often I go to public places in Alberta, and I hear, I wish I could speak better French. French should be fun. French should be accessible. And as long as we don't have quality, locally trained teachers, it's going to be hard.
I mean, we've got an interesting point here from Chelsea, who's watching us live. If you're just tuning in, listening on the Mixler live streaming audio app, we're talking to Dr. Ashley Nunes, a research fellow at Harvard Law. We're talking about to Simon-Pierre Poulin, who's publisher. You're publisher, correct? Is that your title, or editor-in-chief?
I'm the general manager. Yeah,
general manager of Le Journal de Franco, based out of Alberta. Chelsea says, growing up in a rural part of the province, the only way I would have been able, she's in Alberta, the only way I would have been able to learn French was by correspondence in junior high, because not enough kids seemed to want to learn it, or at least it wasn't accessible. Simon-Pierre, you have I was saying in teeing up your appearance on the show that I was especially excited that you agreed to talk to us, because there's that added layer of your perspective. You're a Francophone in Alberta, which adds something, doesn't it, to your perspective, to your experience, and in some cases to your plight, as you describe the Campus Saint-Jean.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to come back to, I think Chelsea's comments, it's true. It's really hard to get access to activities in French and quality education. What I would recommend to someone who's just interested in learning French, even here in Alberta, make it fun. Just listen to music. Find some good music you like and listen. The repetition will make its work. And I think that's also very important. We're debating politics, economy here, but language is not just words you put them together. It's not Google Translate. It's a set of values. It's a culture. It's a new set of cultural references. It's a new way to perceive your own thoughts, your own words, and your own views of the world. It's a beautiful thing. It should be celebrated. So Jesse, just listen to some music, find a good podcast, watch the news in French, and yes, corresponding will help. Or come see us at La Cité Francophone here in Edmonton. We have a theater, we have a cafe. There's so much community event. It's a vibrant community, and it's increasing. Like Alberta, it has the fastest growing French community in the entire country, apart from Quebec, obviously. So yeah, it's...
Ashley, in closing, what should this mean? If there are other executives, general managers, people in positions of leadership in companies, private, publicly traded, what have you, that are going, this isn't really about Air Canada. I mean, in a way, it's about Air Canada, but not totally. We're having a bigger picture conversation about two languages or bilingualism in business across Canada. What should other business leaders be taking from this debate?
I think if you look at the business community, there's probably implicitly a collective shrug where, it's accepted that this is political pandering, from our leaders, and a certain degree of public virtue signaling, quite frankly. And I don't think it meaningfully moves the needle in terms of who businesses choose to hire. Now, just yesterday, there was a statement out, from Air Canada where they said, well, we're going to review our senior leadership positions and assess the extent to which, French speaking is, would be an asset in those cases. Those types of reviews should be done, certainly. But I think first and foremost, people should be hired on the basis of their ability to get the job done. I understand the need for optics, but optics should take a back seat to competence on the job. And there's no evidence to suggest that Michel Rousseau is not competent to perform that particular job.
Just want to add that a bonjour and a merci can go a long, long way. It's a matter of being recognized more than an efficiency or a money thing, I think.
Yep. And in fairness to Simon-Pierre, whenever I cross the border into Quebec, in Burlington, Vermont, I always make it a point to speak to the customs, agents in French, versus when I cross the border in Windsor, for example, where I'll greet them in English. It's just a recognition, I think, and a respect for the history of the province itself. And, that's my choice, but as a Canadian, whether or not I choose to exercise that choice certainly still should be up to me.
I really appreciate both of your availability today. Quick hit from an audience member, Simon-Pierre, before we thank you for your time. They're asking for your comment on the fact that, again, and I can't verify this, although I suspect it to be true, but that's just my gut instinct. Alberta's Minister of Culture, Minister Ron Orr, apparently not proficient in French. An audience member is curious for your take on that.
I could not have a conversation with him, but indeed I heard also that he's not speaking French. I don't have much comment, but what I can tell you is that for our newspaper, again, the only French language newspaper in Alberta, it's pretty difficult to get a hold on the minister and even the Secretariat Francophone. Let's say the communication is not easy, and it should be.
Simon-Pierre Poulin, a journalist, general manager at Le Journal Le Franco, published continuously Alberta's only French-language newspaper since 1928. Dr. Ashley Nunes, kind enough to give us his time, policy director for Our Streets Competition Policy. He's worked at MIT. He's a research fellow at Harvard Law School. To the both of you, have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
I've been keeping an eye over the last couple of minutes. I've been trying to catch up on the live chat. Every once in a while, I'll do an interview. It's like I don't have. I'm present in the interview. I'm talking to the subjects.
Yeah.
So I wanted to drop in on here and give real talkers a voice. Corey says Air Canada is an arrogant company. They think they can do what they want, and in a way, they know it, and the government will always have their back. If Air Canada is going to take a swipe like that from Corey, and Corey might be right. I should also point out that Bombardier probably also feels the exact same way. If we want to start throwing stones at a whole bunch of Canadian companies, just mention Bombardier in Alberta if you ever want to get people talking. And then I would imagine people in Quebec would probably, getting defensive about Bombardier, point out subsidies that oil and gas companies based in Alberta receive. And then we'll all start fighting, just like the politicians want us to, right? Fatima says, for my parents to want the best jobs for me, they would have had to put me in French immersion instead of Arabic immersion. It privileges a certain bilinguist. There are a lot of people that are bi and trilingual that do not speak both English and French. There are many people across Canada that can speak English, Mandarin
yeah.
and French. Or
Spanish. Maybe
you speak, one or two different indigenous languages plus English or French. Is that less? I mean, this is always a supercharged word or a supercharged question. This is when people start talking about real Canadians or true Canadians. And people go, this isn't like the most productive effort. It's quite an exclusionary effort. But if you talk about what's Canadian, I will still refuse. I will never let go of my grasp of celebrating what is truly Canadian, because my celebration or recognition of what is truly Canadian, Hoyles, you can stop wincing.
I'm cringing. I'm waiting for it.
Diversity, a welcoming spirit, empathy. What were you expecting?
I had no idea.
White dairy farmers. Is that what you were expecting?
I had no idea, but I was waiting
inclusive, empathetic, welcoming, supportive. Like so yeah, I think it's okay to have conversations about truly Canadian. It's just, what definition of Canadian are you talking about? By the way, Fatima sent us an amazing email, as did Jillian. They're both in the hopper, ready to go on this about accents. I'm wondering if we have time. We have an interview coming up like right now.
The thing that I struggle with is the idea of how Simon-Pierre mentioned just saying, bonjour or
totally.
And that, or like merci. And to me, like, even just saying that, I cringe, because I'm like, oh, my accent is probably terrible. Like, just
What do you think that people that speak another language, I'm not just going to say francophones, but people that speak another language, like when you and your family go to the all-inclusive in Mexico, great time for me to mention jet set parking. When you and your family go to the all-inclusive in Mexico, or if you travel through Guatemala, or if you venture off to Ethiopia, or if your travels take you to Greece, you think it means something to the vendor or to the taxi driver or to the person selling fresh squeezed juice on the side of the road? Do you think it means something to them if you attempt to greet them and welcome them or thank them in their language, even if your pronunciation is not 100%? I think it probably does. As a matter of fact, I think piling on people for their pronunciation is pretty Bush League. I think that if Amarjeet Sohi, the mayor of Edmonton's speaking English in his early years and has a strong Punjab accent, you think it's cool to make fun of his accent? I think people that make fun of accents, regardless of which accent they're talking about, probably need to check themselves for a second. Because what does that do? When you mock how someone pronounces something, what does that person do? They're not going to try to pronounce it anymore.
Well, that's exactly it.
They're
that's
not going
where
to say
I'm
it anymore.
I don't want to sound like a...
So many double standards for people. There are so many double standards. We need to recognize that. Let me get to Fatima's email. Why not? This was great. This was an email from Michael, who, I shouldn't say this because it came in on November 9th, but I suspect Michael's email, well, let's just say it's in the running for our Real Talk email of the month. The winner of the email of the month every month is going to get one of these new Crescent mugs. Unbelievable. Fantastic. And Unless maybe you request one of the old school. We've got our original diner mugs.
Yeah.
Stock is running
Hefty.
low. They're hefty. They're the big. If you like the big heavy mug, that's the one you want. If you want something that's a little more delicate's not the word, but a little more understated. I'm loving these crescent mugs. So Fatima chimes in on the heels of Michael's email. Michael was taking me to task a little bit in a great way, saying, Ryan the other day was talking about Yves-François Blanchet, leader of the Bloc Québécois, and sort of put on a bit of a French accent to mimic him. And Michael just wondered, is that okay? Like, I'm paraphrasing, but I don't think Jespo would do that with regards to someone from China or someone from India. And he's right. So Fatima writes in and says, team, using accents and the political correctness of it is just like everything else, in my opinion. It depends on the intent and the racial power dynamic. French, English, Italian accents are typically desirable and considered sexy. And as you put it on the show, describing Mr. Blanchet's accent, buttery or smooth. That was Sam, by the way. Buttery and smooth.
You betcha. You betcha.
Hey, credit where it's due. South Asian, Arab, African, Asian accents are, quote unquote, not desirable. Therefore, when those accents are used, it's typically in a mocking manner by a person with more privilege. Is it a surprise that the preferred accents are typically white and the non-preferred accents are racialized? I don't think so. She says, we know the world has always worked this way. Is it right? No, I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions to this, says Fatima, but it seems to be the rule. Just like European beauty, Anglo, blonde, blue-eyed, being the standard. European accents are also the preferred standard. With this in mind, if someone asks, can we do this accent? I would in turn ask, what is the intent? Who is doing the accent and what privilege do we hold? We're in a time where we're questioning everything we say. But isn't it time for us to do just that? The current systems, accepted language, culture of non-accountability have served only one type of person well. Jesperson. No, she didn't say that. White, cis, hetero, able-bodied men.
Jasperson.
You forgot middle class. I, for one, am happy to see the questioning and examining of everything, even if we don't agree along the way. It's refreshing, it's hopeful, and it's as uncomfortable as it may be, but much needed. That from Fatima. Love it. Thank you for your email. talk@ryanjesperson.com is where you can get us. Hey, so I participated in this exercise. I didn't necessarily plan. I mean, I planned it a little bit, but not really. Halfway through this interview, and this is a shout out to Chelsea, to our audience. I hope she's still here to get her shout out. She says, French immersion wasn't available to us in these rural parts of the province because it just wasn't in demand. It wasn't real priority for people. And I thought, you know what I thought? I bet you Athabasca University has something going on with this. And so I was paying full attention to the interview, but I just so happened to swing by athabascau.ca, the website, and I went to programs and courses, and I just typed in French. And what do you know? French 100, French for beginners, French 101, French 200, 201, French 362, second year university French. And what about this one? French 405, translation from French to English. Just as a start, that's on my first glance. If this conversation, this debate, if this story out of Air Canada's CEO and the question from that Francophone reporter, if that's got you thinking, if you're going, hey, I'd like to improve my ability to speak French or other languages, why not check out athabascau.ca? They are Canada's online university. Yesterday, I had a chance to check in with Scott from St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. Asked him how October was, their biggest sale of the year. He said it was great. It's nice for them to be able to put people in vehicles now that the supply issues are being addressed and they're starting to see demos and new cars out there on the lots. I was sitting in a Jeep Grand Cherokee L. This is the one I keep telling you about. I want to add a word to that now because I've now seen it. The Jeep Grand Cherokee L Summit. This is like the high-end, top-end, third row seating, bigger Grand Cherokee. And I'm going to tell you right now, I mean, it all depends within a few grand. Maybe they don't want me doing this, but I'm just going to cut to the chase, save you 5 minutes. You're going, well, what does it cost, Jespo? Let me tell you this. This is a stunningly beautiful SUV, 3 rows of seating, seats 7 with all the bells and whistles. The Summit for like about 83 grand. which I know for a lot of people, you're like, that's ridiculous. My house is 83 grand. I understand that. But when the Escalade is 140, when you have other SUVs 150 plus, the best bang for buck in the SUV market, luxury class, is the Jeep Grand Cherokees at Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge. Be sure to check them out. We want to get to more of your emails, including one from Jillian, who sent us another great, insightful take on the use of languages. I wonder if Real Talker Michael knew that his email would prompt a multi-day conversation. I love it when that happens. But first, we want to take you to British Columbia. There's something happening there that demands the attention of people across this country. Now, you've likely heard of what's going on in Wet'suwet'en, a blockade, an occupation of sorts, and we're gonna get the details from the people that are there on the ground. The occupation started September 25th, and it halted efforts by Coastal GasLink to build an essential part of a pipeline, a 670-kilometer pipeline that would transport natural gas from Dawson Creek in northeastern BC to Kitimat in the province's North Coast region. Well, that construction's been interrupted, and here's a video that was posted by the Gidimt'en Clan. This was released on November 3rd. To call it tense would be an understatement. Check it out.
We are the protectors of this territory through law. You have no jurisdiction in here. You coming close is an act of a violation and aggression. So stand where you are. We are the people of this land. We are protecting the sacred.
10,000 years. And I'm a member of the federal police for this country, and I do have the authority to walk through this area. And that's all I'm doing.
Not today.
Because of what you guys did up there was insulting. You guys arrested a hereditary chief for protecting his land. That you guys are invading. Consult with the chief. You consult with the chief.
Hang on. Where is Chief Wass? If you want me to consult with him.
Oh, don't worry. You bring your leader and we'll talk to him. You're just a puppet right now.
Well, I'm not a puppet.
Just turn around and walk away.
Like I said, I'm just out here walking right now, so.
Yeah, you're not allowed to walk through here. So we're here for the right reasons. We're protecting things, and you're trying to hurt and hinder that.
I'm not.
Oh, you're just following rules. I know, I understand
Actually,
that. But
if you listen to what I said I'm just out here for walking through a patrol area.
It don't work like that. You're a part of them. Okay, so it don't work like that.
I am a part of who?
RCMP, the federal government, the ones that are coming in here raping and pillaging this fucking land. That's who. You're not making no real decisions. If Trudeau wants to come here, we can get Chief Wass out here. Until then, fuck off and go to fuck back where you came from.
Yeah.
Right now, essentially, you're seeing or hearing RCMP officers escorted back to their vehicles. Molly Wickham has agreed to join us, a Gidimt'en Clan member. These are one of the 5 clans of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. She holds the name Kassiik Grizzly House, has been living on and occupying this territory since 2014 with her husband and children. She's completed a master's degree in Indigenous governance at the University of Victoria, the spokesperson for the Gidimt'en checkpoint on Wet'suwet'en territory. Molly, if you'd prefer me to refer to you as Sleydo, you just let me know. Thanks for making yourself available to us this morning, and welcome to Real Talk.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I want to be clear to our audience that we did reach out to a spokesperson from Coastal GasLink to have a conversation between the two of you. That they did not respond to our request for an interview. They did provide a statement, and I can read from that a little later on in this interview. But Molly, it's pretty obvious what we saw in that video. Tensions are high. Resolve is high on behalf of those occupying this territory. What's your insight? What do people need to know?
Yeah, people need to know that we've been here now for 47 days or 48 days, and we're not intending on leaving at any point in time. This water, Witsinqua, the river that we're protecting, that Coastal GasLink plans to drill under, is absolutely sacred and essential to our way of life here. And we're going to do everything that we can to protect it for all of our future generations. The RCMP have tried to come in countless times. They've been turned around by our land defenders and by our allies and relatives, and they will continue to be blocked from accessing this territory.
What happened? This video was posted exactly a week ago. I'm now talking to you on November 10th. What's happened? What's developed, if anything, over the past 7 days?
There has been an increase in police in the area. They've attempted to come in to the end of the road where the access point is blocked. And they've been patrolling and harassing people outside of the blockade. And so they are trying to gather their forces to come in and invade Wet'suwet'en territory once again.
How would you describe the resolve of the people, and how are people preparing for what could? I mean, I would imagine that everybody involved here is probably going to publicly say that they're hoping for no conflict here. But as you gauge the temperature, what are you noticing?
Well, we've already seen that the RCMP have come in, and we've experienced extreme violence at the hands of the RCMP. They always say that they want to resolve it without conflict. Coastal GasLink always says that they don't want to see any conflict or violence happening on the territories. We know that that's just lip service. They have the opportunity to meet with our hereditary chief, Denise Was. That's who the title owner of this land is, in Cassia House of the Gidimt'en Clan. He's requested and made some conditions upon that meeting, and they're not willing to move or budge on that. We've seen militarized raids in 2019 and 2020 on Gidimt'en territory, and we know that they're going to prepare to do the same. We saw sniper rifles, K9 units, helicopters, ERT. We've seen it all, and we know that that is likely what we're going to experience again here.
Molly, we received a statement from Coastal GasLink, specifically from TC Energy. There's no name on it, but it's from their media relations department. They say Coastal GasLink recently surpassed the halfway mark to completion. We're proud that we have accomplished this with the unprecedented support of Indigenous and local communities across northern British Columbia. We're committed to delivering this critical energy infrastructure project, and any risk to the safety of our workforce or others in the vicinity of the project route is of the greatest importance. As we have done in the past, we will continue to keep lines of communication open in an effort to resolve differences and provide information to address concerns. Our preference is always to seek peaceful solutions through constructive dialogue. Has that been the case? Open communication, constructive dialogue?
Absolutely not. All of the communications from Coastal GasLink have basically said, this is what you need to stand down, you need to give up. This project's happening anyway. We'd love to talk to you about ways that we can mitigate the destruction of your territory. Our differences, the fact that they call them differences in opinion or differences in whatever they meant by that, these are not differences. The Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have gone to court in the Supreme Court in 1997, and the Supreme Court ruled that we have never extinguished our title to these lands. So we own these territories. We have every right to block access to these territories. We have every right to protect them in whatever means we see fit. And, the UNDRIP affirms those rights, that there has to be free, prior, and informed consent from the Indigenous people.
Yeah, I think
and that has not happened.
Can I ask you, let me circle back, Molly. Do you prefer Sleydo or Molly? What do you prefer?
Sleydo's good.
Okay. Sleydo, let's talk about, I want to make sure that everybody understands the rights here that are in play, including court decisions. I want people to understand the background. About 13 years ago, in 2008, Wet'suwet'en clans opted out of the British Columbia Treaty process and asserted their land rights to their unceded territory in Canada. Why is this so relevant for people that may not quite understand ceded versus unceded territory? How does that play into this?
Yeah, so we have never signed a treaty. We have never surrendered our territory. There is no documentation or discussions that have ever happened where we have given up rights and we have given up the title to our land. We currently still have title to all 22,000 square kilometers of Wet'suwet'en land. We are not involved with the band council system. The Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs own all of the territory, and they make the decisions about the territory. And so the Indian Act bands, they have jurisdiction on reserves, which is through the federal government. Their elected systems, our hereditary clan system has been in place for thousands of years. It's our self-determined form of governance that is still active on these territories. And so those are the people that make the decisions about land and about what happens on the land.
And this has been relevant in energy and infrastructure and logging and fishing conversations across the country and conflicts across the country over the past number of years. And I think more and more people in this country are trying to become more educated about the difference between, and sometimes the conflict between, elected and hereditary First Nations leadership. When Coastal GasLink, and I'd love to ask them this question, when they tell us in a statement that they're accomplishing this construction with the unprecedented support of Indigenous and local communities, does this highlight to you the potential conflict or the lack of seeing eye to eye between hereditary and elected leadership?
Well, for our hereditary clan system, we went through a series of all clans meetings, which included all of our nation members over years, and then came to a decision by consensus collectively that there would be no pipelines through Wet'suwet'en territory. We brought that to our feast hall, which is our bahlats, that's our governance hall. It's like our parliament, and we made that law. Every clan stood up and said that they affirm that no pipelines would go through our territory. In the band council system, there's, in some of our small communities, there's one chief counselor that's been elected and maybe two band counselors, and they are the ones that make the decision without consulting the community members. And so that's what the band council system was designed for. They're going to them when they know that the hereditary chiefs are the title holders, and they're going behind their backs and going around them to try to get a yes from these bound councils. And oftentimes that's through extortion. The hereditary chiefs themselves have been, threatened with losing funding, have been threatened with having, core child welfare funding cut if they didn't sign on to pipelines. So these same strategies are being used against band councils who are making decisions based on the need for money in often really impoverished communities.
We got an email from an audience member by the name of Tim, and I really appreciate when Real Talkers chime in with questions for guests ahead of time so we can integrate them into interviews. And I think that these are fair questions. They're reasonable questions, Sleydo, and I'd be curious for you to take them on. Tim says, exports of Canadian LNG, of liquefied natural gas, seem to be one of the most, maybe the most impactful things that this country could do to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. He says even a roundtable on this show on Real Talk noted that natural gas is less emissions intensive than coal, and it has a role to play in preventing the worst effects of climate change over the next number of years. Is there support generally for exports of Canadian liquefied natural gas given their ability to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions?
I think that the natural gas industry, and I don't like to call it natural gas industry, I'd like to call it fracked gas because that's exactly what it is. And it's actually, the science behind it proves that it is dirtier than coal. The whole process of liquefying it, this project is planning to burn their own fracked gas in order to have enough energy to liquefy the gas before it's exported. And that's going to blow Canada's, emission targets out of the water just in itself, never mind any of the other projects in this country or in this province. And so the process of getting the fracked gas out of the ground is so toxic. And we've been in communications with the communities that are actually being affected by this. And it's destroying everything that is important to them. It's destroying their water. They can no longer drink their water. All of their animals are sick. They can't hunt. They can't fish. They cannot be Indigenous people. And not only is this going to continue to the climate crisis or contribute to the climate crisis in very, very harmful ways, but it's also going to destroy Indigenous livelihoods. And that's important to us. People talk about their livelihoods and the fact that they need jobs. Well, we have livelihoods as Indigenous people that are core and essential to our identity and to our health as nations. And those are at risk right now as well.
Is there, the average person looking at this will say there's got to be a way. They're gonna see this, try to see it, I think, from a number of different perspectives. And they may be certainly less invested in the real, the realness of this. Your connection to this land and many of the people that are participating, that are stakeholders here. Obviously, there's a higher level of commitment and relevance. But the average person may say, well, why can't parties collaborate? And why can't the pipeline be rerouted? Why can't there be a way around? Is that a possibility? Is that up for negotiation?
We can't speak to other nations' territories, and we can't suggest that they go through other people's territories. Our Gidimt'en neighbors as well are, largely opposed to pipelines through their territories and have fought pipelines going through their territories successfully. And so we wouldn't say just reroute it to some other Indigenous nation. We are here to protect our sacred headwaters with Zinqua that they plan to drill underneath. And this also, it's important to note that this project is only one of a proposed carbon corridor. At one point, there were 13 proposed pipeline projects to go through this territory. And this one is going to set a precedent one way or the other. And so if this goes through, there will be other pipeline projects that try to go through our territory. This pipeline is not just gas. They're building it so that it can be converted to oil. Some of those, discussions are included in impact benefit agreements about, we promise to only put gas through this for 5 years. And then after that, it's up for debate. So whether they want to transport, bitumen in these pipelines afterwards, or whether they're going to start exporting water, we don't know. But we know that this is not a conventional gas pipeline that they're building.
Just an impromptu follow-up question. Would you be totally okay with this if they were transporting water?
No. Drilling under with Zinqua is going to destroy our ability to drink that water forever. Even if everything goes right, even if there's never a spill, even if there's never an explosion, drilling under our sacred headwaters will disturb and threaten our salmon populations. This is a major salmon spawning river. We drink right out of this river. It's one of the last clean drinking water sources in our whole territory. And from the sediment alone of drilling under the river, that will destroy those things forever for us.
Okay, so in your position, and I want to be clear to our audience so they understand, we reached out to Wet'suwet'en leadership and they have referred us to you. In other words, what I'm establishing here is you are speaking on behalf of and with the blessing of the community, of the First Nation. In the position is this project will not proceed, no matter what.
This project will not proceed, and we will do everything that we can to stop it. It does not have consent. The company has no free, prior, informed consent, and we know that how essential this river is to our people and all of our future generations.
Okay, I wanted to ask you one more question from Tim. This from this email we received yesterday. And by the way, Tim acknowledges, he says, this is a really difficult subject given Indigenous rights that exist. He says the questionable legality of the protests, the blockades, the need to protect the environment, and the enormous financial benefits for Northern BC and for Canada as a whole. He says this is obviously a big deal. He says the traditional territory of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs is currently home to significant logging activity by Canfor, including many forestry roads. What is it about a natural gas pipeline, or if you prefer a fracked gas pipeline construction, that is so much more concerning than forestry work? The equipment used is similar. The environmental issues are potentially similar. The standards for environmental protection are typically stronger in energy than forestry. Is that not the case in this area of British Columbia?
Well, the Coastal GasLink pipeline has violated, probably over 100 of their permit conditions. They have destroyed wetlands with no consequence through the Environmental Assessment Office, which is supposed to be overseeing this project. There are supposedly a lot of really strict environmental conditions for this project, but they seem to have the green light and the go-ahead to violate all of their permit conditions and still go ahead. So they are not following these strict guidelines that they supposedly say that they have. They are violating them over and over again, destroying wetlands. They destroyed all the wetlands in Gidimt'en territory with no mitigation plan whatsoever. And they were allowed to continue on and keep doing the work. So we have no faith in the fact that they are, that they are held to any account environmentally or legally. We are obviously concerned with the logging that's happened in our territory. Wet'suwet'en have been fighting to protect our territory for, since contact, and that includes logging. There's been blockades against logging, against Canfor. There was a huge court case against Canfor. We have been very active in trying to protect our territories in every way. And unfortunately, this fight, because of the militarized raids and because of the violence that have been brought to our territories by this company and by the RCMP, this is what's gotten the attention. But we have not been sitting by and letting our territories be destroyed without having a voice, since contact.
Sleydo, I want to go back to the video that we watched, an obvious tension there, between law enforcement and the locals, if I can say. There was an implied invitation that Indigenous leadership will correspond with leadership within the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Has there been follow-up there? How would you characterize that relationship right now? Is it silence? Is there dialogue?
Back in 2020, when there was another blockade on Gidimt'en territory and the police were coming in, there were several meetings between leadership and the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. And the request from everybody that was doing actions was that leadership come and talk to our hereditary chiefs. We know that they're the ones that make the decisions, and they send people who can't make any decisions to come and talk to our highest form of leadership. And so, no, there has never been any response from Justin Trudeau. There has never been any response to come and meet with our hereditary chiefs from John Horgan, who is, the leader of British Columbia. And so, it was a big deal that John Horgan said that he didn't have time in 2020 to come and talk to our chiefs, and he was in the area and avoided them at all costs. And so, we need the highest level of leadership to come and talk to the highest level of leadership from our nation.
Can you and I both agree that this is an absolute nightmare for the Prime Minister?
Well, I hope so. He talks a lot about reconciliation and about Indigenous rights. And at the same time and in the same breath is sending militarized RCMP to come and remove Indigenous people from their own land and criminalize Indigenous people on their own territories and put us in jail. And that is genocide, because we are trying to protect our ability to drink our water and protect our food source. And those are, basic human rights to be able to do those things. And those are being violated while he talks about reconciliation and while he talks about our rights.
Before we thank you for your time, what does it look like out there today? I mean, how many people are out there? What's going on? What does the blockade look like? Is it growing? Can you give us a sense?
Yeah, we have a lot of infrastructure here. It's like a little community, like a little village site out here. There's a lot of snow coming down. We got here on September 25th, and now everybody's in winter boots and snow pants, and there's at least 1.5 feet of snow. So we're settling in for the winter. This is going to be the long haul.
Sleydo, thanks for doing this. Thanks for making yourself available. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's Sleydo, a.k.a. Molly Wickham, Gidimt'en Clan member. That's one of the 5 clans of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and as mentioned, we reached out to TC Energy Coastal GasLink spokesperson who provided us with that statement. You can understand why. I mean, obviously, that would be a remarkable opportunity to have those two engage in dialogue. The RCMP as the third party here is an interesting one. I mean, people are taking a look at RCMP involvement in Fairy Creek, and a lot of their methods have been criticized there. And I'll acknowledge when we say that this show will live in the gray areas and have uncomfortable conversations, this is one of them. I thought that Tim's email to us and his questions were fair and thoughtful, and he came at it from a point of saying environmental protection is important. There are Indigenous rights here, and also there is huge economic benefit to this pipeline. The economic interests of the country cannot be written off. When you talk about the logging and forestry conversations in Fairy Creek, what do people talk about? They talk about jobs, livelihoods. When you talk about coal in Alberta, when you talk about natural gas, or when you talk about the oil sands in Fort McMurray, when you talk about fishing on the East Coast, Micmac back in the conversation again, people talk about jobs and livelihoods because that is a real thing. You don't just pretend like that's not a thing. This is estimated to be a $6.6 billion pipeline, which probably means it would be 8 or 9. And there's a lot to consider. And I think that Sleydo did a remarkable job. I'm not surprised. We were expecting a pretty excellent interview there, but did a remarkable job of making it understandable for people that aren't from there as to why this is so important and why this is such an issue. What strikes me, to maybe state the obvious, is her and their resolve. Like, she's like, this is not happening. So then what? That's the question. And I don't mean to ask it in such ominous fashion, but it's a somewhat ominous question. Okay, now what? You can let us know what you think to talk@ryanjesperson.com. That's, of course, our email address. Coming up in just a few minutes, we're going to check in with, I'm looking forward to this conversation, Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers, a filmmaker. Just got a new film coming out, Kímmapiiyipitssini. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but we'll get her to help us how to better pronounce it. The Meaning of Empathy. It's coming to movie theaters across Canada. It's a National Film Board production about the impact of the overdose epidemic, specifically on Elle-Máijá's community in Southern Alberta. We're going to talk about harm reduction and storytelling. That coming up in just a little bit. First, we want to take you to the mountains. When we talk about environmental protections, some of us may not feel such a connection to land like we hear of in interviews from Fairy Creek or from Wet'suwet'en territory, but can we all agree that getting out into the great outdoors, breathing that fresh air, seeing those magnificent trees does something to our own personal resolve of protecting that environment? Every Wednesday, we're really proud to partner with the team at Tourism Jasper to bring you a feature we call MyJasper Memories. And today, in this week's edition of MyJasper Memories, we're going to celebrate storytelling of a different sort, the art of photography. We want to shine the light on someone who was recently profiled in Jasper's Venture Beyond, the series, a fellow by the name of Mike Gere, who's a local photographer, a light painter. More on that, a light painter. Look at this! If you're listening on the podcast, you have to check this out on YouTube. They call him a tinkerer extraordinaire as well. If the Jasper Dark Sky Preserve was some otherworldly landscape within the Star Wars universe, then Mike Gere would be Yoda. He's a longtime local and a photography guide, and he helps amateur photographers learn how to wield and capture light, even during the blackest of hours. He uses a lot of tools that kind of look like lightsabers, actually, to create his art. And in the 6th episode of Venture Beyond, the series, The Master of Light tells his story. You can check that out by visiting jasper.travel/realtalk. You can link to it. There's this video element. It's absolutely amazing. And there's a 2-day Jasper itinerary that Gere himself has made if you want to try it out and participate. Absolutely amazing opportunity to get out and experience Jasper and learn a new skill in a way that maybe you never have before. I mean, look at these images. Sam, you're not just a photographer, but I know that you really like the art of time-lapse photography. What was it like for you to look through this guy's artwork. I mean, it's amazing.
This stuff is really cool. I personally, I've played around with light painting before. I've never done it out in the mountains. I've never done it to the scale that Mike does. But like, effectively, it's a technique where you just you leave the shutter long and you wave things that make light around, and you can sort of create these shapes and sort of these three-dimensional objects that don't actually exist there. It's bending time with photography a little bit. It's so cool.
I love people. I mean, his works are incredible. I love the comparison to Yoda, but also people that do the words. You can write words in light and just amazing stuff. We also invite you to use the hashtags MyJasper and RealTalkRJ and send us your photos, your favorite photos of Jasper. I've loved following Mark Jenks, who's a photographer, does amazing work in nature and landscape photographer. He's an aurora chaser too, so his work has just been breathtaking over the past while. But he's passed along this photo. He calls this Fire and Ice at Athabasca Falls in Jasper. This is shot just as the rising sun lights up that mist plume. Unbelievable. It's the stuff that takes your breath away. MyJasper Memories is proudly presented in partnership between Real Talk and Tourism Jasper. Again, you can check out jasper.travel/realtalk. Whenever I look at my own Instagram and I think, I'm getting pretty good at this, I then see stuff like that and I'm like, I am brutal.
It's not a competition.
Well, kind of, yeah, no, you're right. But, we do stack ourselves up against others. I guess, what I like about this as well is when you try to do stuff and then you see people that do stuff like that, then you go, okay, I have a lot to learn. It's just a bit of a lesson in humility.
But I think you're proving the point that a lot of experts say that, Instagram makes people feel shit about themselves.
That is true, isn't it? We need to dig into that. We talk about the things that we think that high school students should learn, or junior high school students. I think I'd like to say starting in elementary school. And oftentimes we say financial literacy. That's what all the experts say. We need to be, we're asking kids to do quadratic equations, but nobody understands how credit cards can put them in a tough spot. And maybe our priorities are a little bit screwed up there. We want to see people understand how to find sources of reputable information, develop skills of critical thinking. How do you tell which information is legit and which information isn't? And I think you could probably throw into that as well. Social media is obviously here to stay. Maybe a better working understanding in the early years, grades 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, of how social media can really influence people's mental health. I would like to see that. I mean, it would require some pretty forward-thinking governments. I know that educators would be there for it. I have no doubt. But I would like to see that officially as part of curriculum. I think it would be valuable. Very valuable. That whole idea. I don't know if you had the class Calm. I had a Calm class is what it was called. And so it was like career and life management. Yeah. Social media was just getting started when I was in Calm class. And I mean, I think it would be helpful. I don't know that there's a will for that. Well, there should be. I mean, if we want the best for kids, if that's the whole point of education, is to prepare people for the world, to prepare people, is it to prepare people for success, to prepare people to be able to manage, to prepare people to be able to contribute, whatever it is, however you want to phrase it, it's hard to argue that wouldn't be part of it. True. Yeah. I think it's funny when you're like, if social media is here to stay. I'm like, I hate when I hear songs that reference cell phones and social media. Like slide into my DMs and stuff. I'm like, no. But I think I gotta. Except we use it every single day. I know. We do it for our unofficial, unscientific Twitter polls. We do it for people to reach out to us. We use it to share our content. We use it to come up with ideas. We use it to make interview requests. I mean, if you think about it, I remember when I was hosting breakfast television back in the day, and they were like, "You're going on Twitter," and I was like hell I am. And they were like, "You are going on Twitter," and I was like, "All right, fine." And now I'm like, if I wasn't on Twitter, I mean, when I got fired, how would I share my statement? How would I share the trailer announcing we were launching this show? How would we share with tens of thousands of people every single day our interviews and links to our podcast and things that we're excited about? How would I push out the link to Julie Rohr's scholarship? I mean, how would you do that? How did people used to do anything? Write letters? When we do business as a show, like behind the scenes with our advertising and all of our legal stuff and all that, I mean, every contract, almost every I don't remember the last time I signed a contract with a pen. Almost every contract is, I mean, some of them you have to, but for the most part, they're signed digitally and they're shared on channels like Slack, and we capture PDFs on our phone, and like Me from 15 years ago would have no idea what we're talking about right now. Terry says, Ryan, parents need social media training. Says too many parents are creating a digital footprint of their kids that will not serve them well when they're adults. Which is an interesting point.
Well, the idea that, you take a photo, someone takes a photo of a kid, hopefully theirs, and posts it up, that's out there forever. And that child has not had the choice. I don't know if they can do like informed consent around, yes, I want my photo out there, and understanding the true ramifications of it. I mean, so I always am like, I ask if I can post a photo of a child. And with my nieces and nephews, I make sure to never capture their faces. I try to go back of the head, or cut them out, which might seem like I'm a heartless auntie, but it's really, I'm trying to be cognizant of where their likeness will show up.
I want to go back and read some of the comments that you've been sharing with us before we get to Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers. Looking forward to this conversation about her new film, about harm reduction, the opioid crisis. On the live chat, those of you that were listening to our conversation about the Wet'suwet'en occupation, Genevieve says, I believe that pipelines are the safest way to transport energy resources. I don't want to see them transported on rail, but there has to be ways to work together for outcomes, for better outcomes, and there has to be a government that will hold companies accountable. Mike says, having negotiated many contracts, it's very difficult to do so when decision makers are not sitting on the other side of the table. Mike says, it seems to me having the prime minister sit face-to-face with the chief will do wonders. And Mike, you might want to say face-to-face with the hereditary chief, because I think that that's relevant too. Troy, I've not checked this out. I hope I'm not pushing out something that's horrible or horrific, but it sounds amazing. Troy says there's an unbelievable comedy video of an indigenous pipeline company digging up coffins out of a Christian cemetery to build a pipeline. It's a truck full of coffins just as the white people are leaving church. That sounds amazing.
Yes. Shoe on the other foot, folks. Shoe on the other foot.
Right? I thought you said you weren't doing accents on the show anymore.
That wasn't an accent.
That wasn't?
Just,
okay.
That was, I don't know what that was.
That was more of just a tone.
Yeah.
As opposed to an accent.
So you're telling me to, Hoyles, watch your tone.
No. Well, I mean, but you know what I noticed the other day?
What?
Just because we put each other on the spot in fun ways that are supportive.
100%.
But they're just good for the audience.
Yeah.
The other day, you were like, I went to, did you know I went to drama? I studied drama.
Drama.
And then you winced at me 2-3 days later when I was like, Monsieur Blanchet does not like and you winced at me. And I was like, interesting. Totally
They're different.
Oh, they're different. Why? Because it's you're mimicking the British and I'm mimicking the French.
That is not a British accent, my friend.
Oh, drama. I participated in drama.
No,
what is
that
it?
is more of like a very person taking themselves very seriously.
I beg to differ. I think that's a British accent. It depends.
It
depends what part of England you're talking about.
You need to go to England.
I studied for a year in England. I lived in England. Jillian wrote in on this as well, and Jillian said, I'm in a different time zone, so I had to be catching. Where are you, Jillian? She says I had to be, maybe she just didn't fall back on her clock. Maybe she's not. Maybe Jillian's doing her own research on daylight saving time. I'm just joking. Jillian's a legend. I've never met Jillian in person, but I feel like she's like a very good friend of mine. She followed me over from radio, and we correspond. We've never met in person. We're going to fix that. You know that. She says, I really like that email from Michael on accents. And she said, I just wanted to chime in with my 2 cents. Michael, if you're just listening now, if you didn't hear Michael's email, we read it yesterday. Michael basically said, Jesperson, what's up? You can mimic the French. And I wasn't mocking, I was mimicking. He says, and Michael was cool, he was chill, but he said, like, you wouldn't do that with Chinese accent, you wouldn't do it with an Indian accent, so why can you do it with en français? And Jillian says, so here's the thing about which accents you can do versus which ones you can't. If a bunch of Caucasians are all standing around, the South African, Scottish, Swedish, chances are you can't tell they're different based on how they look. It's their accents that would differentiate them. When folks mimic their accents, it lands like, hey, we all look the same, but sound different. That's funny. She says, Jillian, who, by the way, is originally from Montreal, she says, so go crazy with your Blanchette accent. She says, I love it. She says, when someone is Chinese, Caribbean, Indian, etc., she says, we already stand out. We already look different. If you mimic an accent of a visible minority, it can land poorly and it can actually be hurtful because it feels like you're highlighting differences that are already there, pointing out another way, maybe, that we don't fit in, and it can hurt. She says, but it's not that complicated. I think folks just need to be careful when doing accents of visible minorities. It doesn't bother me as long as it's not mocking. In other words, the accent itself shouldn't be the joke. And there shouldn't ever be an insinuation that everyone of that ethnicity has that accent. That's really annoying, she says. I'm second-generation Canadian. I don't sound like I could be in a reggae band like my mom does. Jillian says, on a funny note, I once met a black guy from Scotland who had a thick Scottish accent, and my brain could barely comprehend what I was experiencing. That from Jillian, who signs off, take care, Real Talkers. So that was another sort of angle of consideration, which I thought was neat. So I appreciate every time somebody takes the time to take a few minutes and send us an email. Lou, who's listening in, says when the dude from The Simpsons, Hank Azaria, says he regrets doing some of those accents, Apu in particular, then maybe it's just not a good thing to do. I don't know if listen, I'm not afraid. I want to have these conversations. I'm not afraid. It's like this is some big courageous conversation. But if you had Apu, the character on The Simpsons, an Indian shopkeeper at the Quickie Mart, and you had an Indian actor with an accent voicing Apu, is it okay? Are we going to pretend like there aren't people with different accents that live and work among us? And when we talk about representation in media, doesn't that mean that? So if you're not joking, if you're not like, oh, look at that dumbass Apu who can barely speak the language, ha, 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 and then he speaks and says something that I'm not going to do, but maybe I should be able to do it. Jillian says if I'm not mocking him, if I'm painting... Anyway, point being, if the accent is not the joke, in other words, if Apu is just a character... he's a community member, he's a shopkeeper, and he happens to have an Indian accent, then is it okay? What about Kim's Convenience? What about the CBC show? If you've watched it, the Korean accents oftentimes put on by people that do not have those, they are Korean, Korean Canadian, but they do not have those accents. They're putting on those accents for the show. Well, why wouldn't they just speak, I don't mean normally, let me pick my words carefully, but why don't they speak as they speak? Why can't they just be visibly Korean Canadian? Why do they have to put on the accents? Did the accent become the joke? I mean, when Disney puts out a film, like maybe Moana is a bad example. What's a better one? Like Disney's done like the Dias Los Muertos, and like they've done like sort of like Latin American inspired, and there's a new one coming out about a house that gives the residents magical powers. I saw the trailer the other night. Looks really cool, actually. Looks beautiful. I think, is there a Pixar? It doesn't matter. There's a kid's cartoon coming out. And the people have Latin American accents in the film. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they're played by Latin American actors or not. They probably are. I would imagine you've got to be kind of in tune with that if you're going to do that kind of stuff these days. In other words, participate in those feature films and those art projects. But is it not a good thing that it's accented English, right? And I guess all English is accented. It just depends on where you're speaking it from, right? Yeah. I mean, my English is accented if I'm talking to somebody from New Zealand or somebody from, wherever, from Holland. Like, they're going to go, wow, you have a Canadian or at least a North American. Everyone has an accent where you're from. Is that a good thing? I think it's a good thing that it's represented, but it's not being mocked. Like, what about, Cheech and Chong? Like, there's a million examples.
There are a million examples, 100%. I think who gets to decide what and what is not mocking?
Some random guy wonders, is it bad if Chadwick Boseman, may he rest in peace, put on an accent? Is it bad if he put on an accent in Black Panther when he's African American and has a traditionally so-called American accent? Corinne says she says hire the minority, but I think what Corinne means is hire the person to represent themselves in the film. They have the skills to do it. 100%, obviously. Sam, what do you think on this? Where do you land on this?
I was actually thinking a little bit about Kim's Convenience because I want to add another layer to this. So Paul Sun-Hyung Lee, who is the actor that plays the patriarch of the family, older guy, he was asked about the accent that he uses on the show in an interview once, and he said, I'm just doing my dad. Like, I'm literally just talking like my dad would talk because I always thought it was, and him and I would make fun of it growing up, is, you know, sort of broken Korean accent English, and the kind of the, you know, the dynamic that they would have growing up in Toronto, in this multicultural Canadian city. And that was always something that, you know, he considered to be this really rudimentary part of being introduced to Canada. And so, you know what I mean? It's like, that's another layer that you can sort of peel back on this, is we have a Korean Canadian actor who is, you know, essentially doing a little bit of a turned up to 11 accent, but at the same time, it comes from one of his family members.
Yeah. I think this is a gray area. It's a gray area. Like, if he's doing his dad, that he's honoring his dad, but at the same time, why is that accent important to the story? And then you may say, come on, it's important to the story because people can relate to that. The first generation Canadian, the immigrant story, the community member, there's nothing wrong with the accent. I would be one of those people. I would say, yeah, I mean, it doesn't, I will say I've wondered about it. I even wonder about titles of shows. Blackish. Like, the title of that show, I'm like, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't know.
But it's produced and it's led by somebody that
absolutely
that lives in that identity. It's not somebody taking it. It's not blackface.
Well, yeah. I mean, can you? Yeah. Jeez, what about that teacher? I don't think on the air, on the show, we ever talked about that teacher in the States that showed up to math class. Wasn't it math class, I think, in blackface, like for Halloween? What?
Yeah.
And they're on suspension. I mean, suspension? What do you even, I mean, maybe there's due process, but like, come on.
To quote Uncle Joey, cut it out.
Hoyles, what a throwback. What a reference. Mike wants to pull this conversation. Hang on, before we go any further, is Elle-Máijá ready to rock? Okay, so no worries. So that means we have a little bit of extra time here to hash this out. This is the whole point of showing up to Real Talk. I love these conversations. Mike has taken us to a different direction, which is great. He says people have given Bryan Cranston, the actor, they've given him shit for playing a quadriplegic. And he says, I guess you could find, as Mike says, a real-life quadriplegic, but that doesn't mean that person is a better actor than Bryan Cranston. And I'm going to say, and that's fine because you and I can disagree on this, Hoyles, and I will go to the fucking wall on this one.
Bring it.
You know, people are like, Sean Penn should not have played the character in I Am Sam, the mentally disabled character. Or, why am I drawing a blank on the name of, like, Daniel Day-Lewis, like one of the most brilliant actors of literally of all time. My Left Foot. Shouldn't have been should have been a person with a disability, not Daniel Day-Lewis, or not Bryan Cranston playing a quadriplegic. Come on.
Disagree.
Okay, go ahead.
Representation matters. And,
of course.
And you can say, I think people could make the argument. I can see the argument like, well, they're being represented on screen. But the point is I guarantee you.
That's I think your first F-bomb on the show, Hoyles. Nice job.
Guarantee you.
And your second.
Can I go for three?
I would hold it at two.
Hat trick. That
let you do whatever you want.
That there are actors out there that would be able to, that are available and capable and qualified.
Yeah, and if you wanted to gross $19,000 at the box office, you could do that.
But
My Left Foot with some guy you've never heard of.
I disagree.
Okay. Sarah, if you think that any person with a disability would be just as much of a draw as Daniel Day-Lewis in a film?
That was early in his career. That was before. That was like one of the things that made his name. So
because he's one of the all-time greats.
I guarantee that there is
That's
somebody...
like saying I could skate for the Oilers instead of Wayne Gretzky because it was early in Wayne Gretzky's career. Come on. Like I feel quite strong. I feel quite strongly about this.
I feel very strongly too because I feel that there should be and there is, not that there might be, there is a very talented actor that fits that bill. Maybe it'll take more and longer to find them, but they are out there. It's just like Will and Grace when they had somebody that's straight. They could have cast someone that was not straight.
I think that equitable access and representation is really important in the arts. I don't even think that you should have to be gay to play gay. I don't think you should have to be straight to play straight. Unfortunately, as a matter of fact, tragically, members of the LGBTQ2S+ community have been playing straight people for years because they had to if they wanted to work. So I think that this is a little bit of a different scenario. But I think, for example, I mean, like, what's a good one off the top of my head? Modern Family. One of the guys, I can't remember. Cam, is Cam straight? Yeah, I think Cam he's the bigger guy.
Eric Stone Street is you're asking about. Yeah.
And he's straight, right? In real life?
Yes,
but
he
he plays a gay man on the show, but a brilliant actor. This is gray area, and I love it, and I respect your position.
I'm here for it.
I don't agree with you. I'll tell you, my son, this is a true story, just yesterday, this is a true story. Yesterday, my son, we're driving together. He's going to spend some time with Papa and Grandma. And on the way there was a moment of silence in the vehicle. And he says to me, he's 6 years old. And he says, Dad, what does it mean to agree to disagree? And my heart just about exploded. And so for anybody that wants to rip on my parenting, there you go. No, but serious. And I talked to him. He's 6. I said, so if you think the red crayon is the best color, and I think the blue crayon's the best color, and you're sure you're right, and I'm sure I'm right, and maybe we both are right in our opinion, and we realize we love each other, and it's not worth fighting about because we don't really care, and who really cares if either person thinks the other crayon is the best color? We can agree to disagree. And he's like, huh. And he kind of looked out the window, and I went, that's real talk. I was like, that's what real talk is. That's what it is. I'm really excited to talk to Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers in just a little bit. You know what I'm going to do? We're going to lead off this interview talking about representation in film. She's a storyteller. She's a filmmaker. And then we'll get focused on harm reduction and the opioid crisis. She's got a very powerful new film coming out. But first, I wanted to remind you how proud we are to partner with the team at Park Power. You know, you can choose, especially where we live in Alberta, you know, there's different options. You don't just move to a part of the country. It's like, how do we get our power? Well, this is the power company. Well, how do I know I'm getting a good deal? You don't. That's the point. You can compare rates with Park Power on their website, parkpower.ca. Electricity, natural gas, internet, fixed rate. You want it? You want to know what you're paying every month? Perfect. Varying rate, variable rate, they call it. You want to maybe roll as the market, as the commodities roll. As I'm getting all the phrasing wrong. I'm not a trader. I'm not a commodities trader. That may surprise some people. If you want to kind of go with the flow, you can do that too, and they never lock you in. You can get out of the deal. 2021-Real Talk is the promo code at parkpower.ca that will save you $70 off your first bill. They're basically going to buy you dinner, or depending on where you eat, maybe they buy you 2 or 3 dinners. $70, no joke. Our Real Talk wine of the month is Brewer Clifton. And we're really excited to be partnering with founder and winemaker Greg Brewer, who was named 2020 Winemaker of the Year by a little publication you may have heard of, Wine Enthusiast. If I can recommend a few that I've had a chance to try, in particular, the Brewer Clifton Santa Rita Hills Pinot Noir is phenomenal. And the Ex Post Facto Syrah, which is an exclusive to Wine and Beyond. You can find Brewer Clifton at Wine and Beyond or ask for it anywhere you get your fine wines. There's a new film, and we're going to be telling you where you can see it. It opened November 5th in Vancouver. It opens in a couple of days in Lethbridge. The Movie Mill in Lethbridge deserves a shout out. This is this independent theater. This guy I've had a chance to interview him before. His perspective on who he'll allow to show films and this guy, it really takes it to the next level. I like it. Movie Mill in Lethbridge gets a shout out today. Winnipeg, November 19th. That's where it opens in Regina too, and Saskatoon. In our home city of Edmonton on November 20th at the Metro Cinema at the Garneau. Also opens in Toronto November 20th and 24th in Victoria. The point is, it's opening this month across the country. It's Kímmapiiyipitssini. It's a Blackfoot word, by the way, that means giving kindness to each other. Here's a clip.
Home, Ghana, otherwise known as Kainai, or the Blood Reserve. Nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, Kainai is the largest reserve in Canada. Beginning in 2014, fentanyl flooded the illicit drug trade on the reserve. This new reality has forced our community to approach addiction in radically different ways.
The difficulty was in convincing people that harm reduction is the route that we have to take.
By no means is it celebrating addiction, but what it does is it celebrates the lives of people without judgment.
Our group here is looking at expanding what we have to do to help our community heal.
There you go. Now you could save a life.
It's very heart-wrenching when you go on a call and people are breathless.
And we can't sit back and expect things to change without doing the work.
Trying to get off these oxy-80s by yourself, it's hard.
The next thing we want to do is address a detox facility on reserve.
History marks the Bloods as some of the fiercest, strongest people there ever was. And I want us to get to that point again.
I'm happy.
We have a Blackfoot word that's called Kímmapiiyipitssini, which means giving kindness to each other.
Thank you.
And that means also compassion for those who are suffering.
It's an amazing thing that they've done. And in my eyes, they're heroes.
Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers is a filmmaker, a writer, director, producer, actor behind Kímmapiiyipitssini, The Meaning of Empathy, and we're very excited to have you joining us on Real Talk this morning. A good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Morning.
This has got to be, with regards to how the creative process unfolds, I imagine there's a seed planted at some point, and then you develop the resolve to make a film and to tell the story, and then the production process unfolds, and blood, sweat, and tears goes into it, and now here you are on the eve of its nationwide release. You're seeing the trailer there. What a journey.
Yeah, it's been 5 years. It took 5 years to make the film.
How did this issue first wind up on your radar? 5 years ago, when did you know that you had to make this your next high-profile project?
I'm from Ghana, or Kainai Blood Reserve. My mother is a physician there, and she's been practicing medicine at home on the reserve for 20 years now. So I heard about everything she was witnessing on the front lines of this crisis. It started in 2014. It's when fentanyl first hit our community. And I was also witnessing the profound grief that our community was experiencing. There's not a single person in our community who hasn't lost a loved one to this crisis. And so I felt an urgency and an obligation to document what was happening in the community as a filmmaker and as a community member. So that's how it came about.
Did you find that this was becoming more of an issue on pace with the opioid crisis across the country? In other words, the numbers that we see in particular, it seems, out of BC and Alberta, though we know that this is a nationwide and a worldwide epidemic, or has this been something that was maybe more of an issue to community members there? Were you seeing warning signs or red flags prior to maybe some of the more mainstream conversations about the opioid crisis?
Yeah, Kainai was one of the first communities to be impacted in Canada by the opioid crisis. So it started out in the western part of Canada, and now we're seeing it throughout Canada. So Kainai was one of the first communities to be impacted by the presence of fentanyl and the opioid crisis. And so very early on, this really complicated conversation around harm reduction versus abstinence arose within our community, because, like so many other places, harm reduction is a contentious issue within the community, and I think you could say that about the rest of Canada as well. So the film also looks at that complicated conversation about, what is harm reduction, how does it work, what does it look like within an Indigenous community, and how can we implement it in a way that's okay with the rest of the community.
I'm looking forward to having a fulsome conversation with you about harm reduction. I think it might be beneficial for our audience members to understand, and for me to better understand, the title of the film, a very significant word or a significant theory or value represented.
Yeah, so Kímmapiiyipitssini is a Blackfoot value that means to give kindness or to have empathy for others. And I also think about it as a survival mechanism. It's what has gotten our community through through genocide. It's why we're still around, because we have the capacity to love and care for one another as a community. And harm reduction is rooted in this understanding or this value that we offer dignity to people who use drugs and alcohol, that we offer empathy and compassion rather than judgment. And so there was this moment when my mother and a group of women from our community visited Vancouver's downtown east side, which is a global leader in terms of implementing harm reduction. They've been on the front lines of numerous addictions crisis over the decades. And so my mother and a number of women from home who all work in health department came to Vancouver and learned from people who work on the front lines in Vancouver's downtown east side, and got to witness harm reduction in action and what it looks like on the ground. And my mother had this epiphany where she realized that harm reduction and the core values of harm reduction are very much in line with this idea of Kímmapiiyipitssini, of having empathy and compassion for others, especially people who are suffering, who are vulnerable and marginalized.
I think that there would be value here in talking about harm reduction. I think that people have a general working understanding of what that means, and there are different levels of it. Certainly, we think of supervised consumption services. People will talk about safe supply. People will talk about decriminalizing or legalizing all drugs, mental health supports. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. I would imagine there's obviously a cultural interpretation or a cultural influence on harm reduction in this community that you feature.
Yeah. So harm reduction can be so many different things. When I first started this film, I had a very novice understanding of what harm reduction is. I think a lot of the general public does as well. And so it was this incredible learning journey, just growing to understand what harm reduction is, and more so understanding the core values of harm reduction, which is, to meet people where they're at on their journey in recovery and in their relationship with substance use disorder. So historically in our community, alcohol has been the main struggle when it comes to addictions, and abstinence-based programs like AA, NA, 12-step programs have been kind of the go-to method for treating addiction. And I think we see that across the board, not just in Indigenous communities, but in Canada and the US in general. When you watch films, fiction, or documentary, when someone has an addiction, you'll often see, a group of people sitting around a circle at an AA meeting saying, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic. And so that idea of 12-step programs and abstinence being the only way to treat addiction has been really ingrained into society. And we can say the same for my community. And so what happened with the opioid crisis and the introduction of fentanyl is that our community took that approach that we've taken with alcohol and other forms of addiction, and realized very quickly that wasn't working for people who were addicted to fentanyl or heavy opioids. For one, the biological dependency on opioids is just so incredibly strong that when someone goes through withdrawal or feels dope sick, it can feel like they're dying, like they're in so much physical pain. And so relapse is so very common. And so when someone relapses, after not using, they'll go back to using the amount that they were using before, and often overdose and die. And so we were finding that the abstinence model was actually doing more harm in many cases than good. And so it forced our community, especially people like my mother and others working on the front lines, to have to adapt and think about how can we do things differently to save lives, because this abstinence model is not working. We're continually losing people to fatal overdose. And so they began to implement different forms of harm reduction. So one was the introduction of naloxone or Narcan kits to lay people, just to general community members. People were trained on how to administer Narcan. And so Narcan reverses an opioid overdose. And so that was pretty incredible to have just regular everyday people be trained in how to administer Narcan and to distribute those into the community. And at the time, that was quite a radical thing. We didn't see that in a lot of communities in Canada. And then following that was opioid agonist therapy. And so that's essentially replacing illicit opioids with prescription treatment like methadone or Suboxone. And so Suboxone was introduced into our community. And with Suboxone, it has an amount of opioid in it that will meet the person's biological dependency, but it also contains something that prevents people from feeling the high of being on an opioid. And so the idea is that eventually they'll taper off of the Suboxone and not have to be on anything anymore. And so that was a very radical thing for our community. A lot of people struggled with this idea of opioid replacement therapy, of offering people something else rather than just quitting cold turkey.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about that because I think that, there's I mean, when I say there's debate, you always have to acknowledge, like, are you talking about, is there debate between addictions counselors and mental health professionals and frontline ER physicians, or is there debate between like scientists and politicians? Because that's different. But there seems to be debate around, let me say, bigger picture, where provincial governments or federal governments should invest funds and should focus to address this opioid crisis that kills, I don't have stats in front of me, but approximately kills as many people or more as COVID-19 has over the past year and a half. But you don't hear it talked about as much. You sure don't, not even close. And a lot of people will say, for example, well, this provincial government is putting $50 million or is making a significant commitment into detox programs and programs for people that are looking to leave that lifestyle of drugs and looking to leave it behind and get on the right track. And then you'll say, well, how can you possibly criticize funding resources for people to detox? That's very important. And then other people will have their say on, well, what we find the science shows it's better this way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we've heard these debates. And I think most people are at least familiar in the shallow end of the pool on those conversations. Is there an added complexity in maybe Blackfoot tradition or in Indigenous tradition, do you think, that adds a complexity to this conversation? Or is it the same sort of premise that we see with a macro lens across the entire country?
I would say it's a little bit of both. I would say primarily it's just the same attitudes we see across Canada in terms of abstinence versus harm reduction. So Suboxone, for instance, is considered, by people who don't understand harm reduction, is considered a form of enabling. They see it as just, substituting one drug for another without really understanding the biological implications of being addicted to an opioid and what it means to try and quit something like that. And so, yeah, it's very similar conversations within our community as within the rest of the general Canadian public. And I think we see it in Alberta predominantly. It's a very heated conversation because our conservative government has cut a lot of funding to harm reduction initiatives. And the supervised consumption site in Lethbridge was closed last year. They were citing financial mismanagement, but after a forensic audit, they realized that there was no financial mismanagement. So what I take away from that is that the closure of that site had more to do with stigma and shame and attitudes towards harm reduction and addiction as a whole. And so there's a lot that I think we're up against when it comes to saving lives by implementing harm reduction, because what it comes down to a lot of times is that people who are vulnerable, people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, especially Indigenous people, are not considered human beings. They're not offered the same dignity and respect as people who are not living with addiction. And yeah, so it really comes down to that, our empathy and our ability to empathize with people who are vulnerable, people who are on the margins, and people who are living with a great deal of trauma that leads them to have to rely on substances to self-medicate.
Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers, filmmaker, our guest. If you're just tuning in live on the streaming Mixler audio app, did anything? Did you have any moments of? I can think I've never done a documentary. I've produced some mini docs, some little vignettes, and I know the work involved in those. I can't imagine feature length, but every once in a while, in an interview or grabbing B-roll or footage or whatever, something happens, and you go, "Oh wow." Right? Something happens and you have this as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, you have it like an epiphany. And sometimes you even change your mind on something. It may even alter the course of the film. Did you have 1 or 2 or 10 of those moments?
Yeah. I mean, every single day that I worked on this film, I had moments like that where I was just so incredibly humbled and in awe of the work that happens in my community. I think early on in the crisis, and it's still an issue when we see representations of our community in the news media. It's so often framed through this lens of tragedy and trauma and victimhood, and we don't get to see the incredible strength that exists in my community and all of the community mobilization that happens. And that was one of the inspirations for making this film as well, was to document all of that incredible work that was happening on the front lines. Like, so many people just putting in countless hours of their time to try and save lives and fight for solutions with so few resources and so many barriers. The film also looks at the issues with policy and the barriers that Indigenous communities face in terms of getting support and finding solutions when it comes to addictions.
Can I just want to ask a question that's direct, and it might be offensive, but I just want to, like, it's just real talk. Like, do you encounter a lack of sympathy from the general public with regards to this very real and deadly issue within First Nations communities? I just think I look at, I can't ignore attitudes that I've seen around me. I think that people are having more open conversations around them when we look at people experiencing homelessness downtown in the urban centers, when we look at people on reserve, when we look, and people are kind of like, yeah, that's the Indigenous, like that. You know what I mean? I mean, that's kind of been this attitude for a long time. Do you experience that as a filmmaker? Did you see it in real life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Racism is endemic to Canada. I mean, this country was founded on the genocide of Indigenous people. And so you see it in every facet of society. I mean, I'd like to say there are a lot of people who are doing really important work, people who are allies, people who understand that the reason that so many of our people are living with addictions is because of the historical legacy of settler colonialism and what's happened to our people and what continues to happen to our people. And so there's just a great deal of racism that exists throughout Canadian society, and that leads to these I would say disgusting attitudes towards Indigenous people, who are not even perceived as human beings, especially the people who are living on the margins, people who are vulnerable and who are living on the streets of our urban centers. And so the film also looks at that. You know, it's an attempt at trying to get settlers to understand why things are the way they are and why there are so many Indigenous people struggling with addictions. It's directly connected to that history of residential schools, of the 60s scoop, of all of the really harmful parts of the Indian Act, which was essentially a genocidal government policy that, you know, prevented us from being able to practice our culture and spirituality, prevented us from being able to leave the reserve without a pass from an Indian agent, prevented us from being able to vote. There were so many things that we weren't allowed to do because of the Indian Act, and it's undeniable that is a violent government policy, which continues to impact us today. But further to that, like, you can't just talk about historical trauma. We have to talk about current systemic inequality that exists in Canada, like the number of Indigenous people who are living in poverty. It's horrible. You know, there's so many things that our people do not have access to that the general Canadian public takes for granted. I attempted to get people to understand that legacy and the ongoing systemic inequality is exactly why we're in this position today, and that we need to approach this situation, approach the people who are struggling on the margins with empathy and compassion, because they're human beings. They're people who have hopes and dreams. They're people who have loved ones. It's not like they woke up one day and decided they wanted to become addicted to fentanyl, you know?
I totally appreciate you saying that. And I think it's such an important conversation to have. And I feel like, I know that within Indigenous tradition and through perspectives I've gleaned from having interviews, there's that idea of the 7 generations, and that works in different ways. I mean, trauma experienced for at least 7 generations and 7 generations of healing. And that, leads me to believe that, in some ways, I don't know, I don't want to feel like I'm sort of laying on the couch here and just spilling my guts to you, but in some ways it I think gives us a bit of a pass, because people go, oh, 7 generations, that's a lot of time. We've got 120 years to fix this. And on the other hand, I think that it reiterates the importance of work right now, because we got to start right now. And I think that when we're talking about issues around the environment, or we're talking about issues around equality, or we're talking about issues around reconciliation in this context, the work needs to start now. And I do feel like more people understand that resolve and the importance of it. It's taken tragedy and it's taken unignorable truth, and people have been mentally, me included, have been mentally wrestling with so many things about our idea of this country and who we are, and maybe attitudes we've held in past. But I do feel that there's kind of a groundswell coming now. Whether that turns into political accountability, whether that starts to influence how people vote. I don't know that recent conversations around residential schools had any impact on the recent federal election, which is a bit of a gut twist, to be quite honest. But I do feel like it's being discussed more frequently, obviously prompted by films like yours, by projects like yours. Do you get that same experience? Do you see the general population taking this more seriously as a national assignment?
Yes and no. I think this summer, when we witnessed the atrocity of this discovery of thousands of unmarked graves of Indigenous children who were essentially murdered at residential schools, it was kind of a wake-up call. I think there was a national reckoning. It's frustrating that it took the discovery of the unmarked graves of children for people to really care and understand the gravity of that situation and the legacy of those institutions, because Indigenous people have been saying it for generations. We have been speaking our truth for generations, and Canadians weren't necessarily willing to listen. But I do think there is change, and I think that wake-up call, or that reckoning, is forcing Canadians to understand that despite the fact that this happened, 1 or 2 generations ago, everybody's implicated. That history is not that far back, and we have a great deal of unlearning and learning to do collectively. And I think with this film in particular, I wanted to be able to show the strength of my community. So I wanted people to be able to witness all of that hard work that's happening in the community. And my community isn't particularly unique when it comes to that. If you look at Indigenous communities across the country, there are so many everyday heroes, people who are working with so few resources to try and keep our communities together, to ensure a future for our youth, to ensure that we can be, strong and thriving nations. But we're doing so with so few resources. With our community in particular, a lot of the initiatives that were taken were coming from within the community, and were coming from tribal dollars rather than federal or provincial support. Whereas, if you see what's happening with the opioid crisis in urban centers, it's the provincial government that's responding to that. And so this film also kind of tries to shine a light on the bureaucracy and the very challenging things that people working on the front lines have to face in terms of navigating that bureaucracy and how to receive the support that's necessary to give people the services that they need.
Elle-Máijá, I want to make sure that everybody that wants to see this film can find it as easily as possible. We know that people approach taking in art like this with great seriousness, but we also have fleeting attention spans, and sometimes if it's too hard to find, then people forget about it. So let's get direct here. November 5th, Van City Theatre in Vancouver. November 12th, the Movie Mill in Lethbridge. November 19th, Cinematheque in Winnipeg, Rainbow Cinema in Regina, the Roxy Theatre in Saskatoon. The 20th of November at the Metro in Edmonton, and at the Hot Docks Ted Rogers Cinema in Toronto. November 24th at the Cinecenta Theatre in Victoria. Is there, well, I'll let you know, of course, our Sarah Hoyles has tweeted out the link to the film. Is there any web address or web link or one social media account that you want people to go directly to?
Yeah, they can follow us on the Meaning of Empathy film at Instagram, and they can also follow us on our Facebook page at Kímmapiiyipitssini, the Meaning of Empathy. And the National Film Board also has updates as well. So yeah, I just hope people go and see this film and go in with an open heart and an open mind. And I'm just immensely proud of my community. And I think we have a lot of strength and a lot of beauty and love that exists within the community.
I appreciate it. 5 years. What a passion project. Amazing and so important. Congratulations. Let me ask you this in closing. It has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about, but you're an actor and a filmmaker, so you're here. I mean, it's on a silver platter, the opportunity to ask you this question. I'm not sure if you heard any of our dialogue in studio before you joined us, but we were talking about representation in the arts and representation in film. The conversation started with whether or not it's okay for an actor to adopt a different accent in participating in film. We then started talking about ethnicity. You may talk about religion. We were talking about roles that would portray someone with a disability and whether or not it's okay if an able-bodied actor were to play that person. I suspect I know what you're going to say to me when it comes to whether or not it would be okay for a non-Indigenous person to play an Indigenous person in film. But bigger picture, and I don't want to assume anything, bigger picture, what's your opinion or your take on representation in the arts?
Well, I mean, that's a really large topic.
It's a huge question. I know.
But, it's interesting. I recently listened to a couple podcast episodes from the disability community about representation of people with disabilities on screen. And what I gathered is that there are a lot of actors who live with disabilities who should be able to play the roles of people with disabilities on screen. And I think the same exists for Indigenous representation. We've been misrepresented and erased on screen for over a century now. Indigenous people were some of the first people to be documented with the moving image, but Hollywood has a long history of having non-Indigenous people play Indigenous people on screen. But further to that, so many of our stories or stories about Indigenous people have come from non-Indigenous voices, and that feeds into a great deal of misinformation and misrepresentation, and that's directly related to racist stereotypical ideas of who Indigenous people are, and it's quite dehumanizing. So I really think it's important that the people who are telling stories about Indigenous people are Indigenous. I think it's really important that we are the ones guiding these narratives, because this is our lived experience. These are our stories. This is our intellectual property. But further to that, it's really important that we are the ones portraying ourselves on screen. I mean, I think it's kind of obvious and common sense. But there are still quite a few actors who are non-Indigenous who play Indigenous roles. If you watch Yellowstone, Kelsey Asbill, she's not Indigenous. And yeah, it's unfortunate because it's also a theft of resources and a theft of space, because that space and those resources belong to us because those are our stories. And we've seen this kind of issue arise in Canada a lot in the last year. We had or the last couple of years, we had, Joseph Boyden and Michelle Latimer, and now Carrie Barassa, who's involved with Indigenous health and academia in Saskatchewan. Those people are not Indigenous, but they claimed Indigenous identity. And in doing so, they claimed resources and space that belong to Indigenous people, because we have so little space allotted or given to us by the general public because of, deeply ingrained racist attitudes. And then those people made a living off of these false identities. So yeah, it's a very complex issue, but my short answer is Indigenous people should play Indigenous people on screen, and Indigenous people should guide our stories behind the camera.
Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers, thank you for such a thoughtful response to that. And thanks for giving us the gift of your time today. Again, congratulations on the film. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You've got it. Filmmaker Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers. Nice booking, Hoyles. That's great stuff. And what a great perspective. I was curious to see, because we've done a lot of talking. I saw somebody, I wish I could remember who it was. You deserve the credit, but on our live chat, somebody was saying people should check out the Crackdown Pod. We had the host of Crackdown Pod, Garth Mullins, on the show. This was several months. I think we can say now many months ago.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming up
in one of our first months,
wasn't it? It was like
very early,
pretty early. But Garth is a fascinating guy and does amazing work on the Crackdown Pod, and I would recommend it. But I was curious to see what Elle-Máijá's experience would be as a filmmaker. How does the to speak in artistic terms or in storytelling terms, how does the Indigenous angle inform a conversation about harm reduction?
Mm-hmm.
And how does it localize, and how does it become personal? And how does that Blackfoot tradition, the whole name of it, the name of the film, right? Kímmapiiyipitssini, the meaning of empathy. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what Real Talkers think about that film. Be sure to check it out, and be sure to show her your support where it counts, with showing up at the theater and buying a ticket. We're able to do this show because we have the support of amazing sponsors and partners like the team at Kubi Energy. If you go to kubienergy.ca, you'll find right away a pop-up that says, want a free solar quote? Well, not right now, Kubi, because I'm doing your mention live on Real Talk. But yeah, if I wanted to, it'd be that easy. You can go on, you can hit the drop-down menu, learn more about their products and services. Maybe it's home solar that you're looking into. Are you building a new build? Is this a retrofit? Or are you improving your current setup? Maybe you were one of the so-called pioneers of solar like 20 years ago. You're an OG, but it's time to maybe look into what's new, what's more efficient. Kubi does it all at kubienergy.ca. Our friends at Friesen Brothers want you to know there's a birthday celebration coming up. Yeah, that's right. Their sourdough starter, Charlie, he's named Charlie, is turning 6.
Are you sure Charlie's a guy?
Charlie could be a girl.
Because aren't they mothers? Isn't
I
it
know
a mother?
a Charlie. I know I don't know. I've heard it called a starter. Is it a mother?
Well, there's like a mother and... Anyways, we could go further into it. So
Friesen Brothers wants you to know that Charlie is turning 6, and they are thrilled that there's a chance for you to pop into the Friesen Brothers of... No, you know what? Hey, listen, I'm not shaking my head at the bigger premise. I'm just shaking my head that we're in an ad read. That's all. I'm not shaking my head at the bigger premise. The police are here.
Language police.
The Alberta Sourdough Starter turns 6 on November 17th. Why is this a big deal? It's a big deal because at the 16 Friesen Brothers across the province, you can receive a free cinnamon spread, which is no joke, plus 5,000 Smart Shopper bonus points with every Alberta Sourdough purchase on November 17th. You can learn more at friesen.com/Charlie. Our friends at Westworld Computers are ready to take your order either in person at the store that they've owned and operated, family-owned independently for more than 40 years, or online at westworld.ca. It's never been easier to search for whichever Apple product you need and have it shipped right to your door, whether it's Apple TV, the iPhone, the Mac, accessories. Maybe you want to check out what they've got on special. You can find it all, plus book your service appointments at westworld.ca. And finally, our friends at Local Waste. I wanted to focus on something a little bit different this morning. Of course, we always tell you about Trash Talk, and that's coming up a couple of days from now. So now is a great time to send us your emails, get something off your chest, whether it's something about me, hopefully, probably it's something about Sarah, you want to just send us an email to talk at RyanJasperson.com.
Bring it.
They'll you got to be one thing I've learned in broadcast. When you say bring it, people will bring it. Talk at RyanJasperson.com. But here, I wanted to focus on their customer testimonials. You go to localwaste.ca. How about this from Jeremy? He gives them 5 stars. It says, I used local waste services over a period of 6 months during my home reno. They provided excellent customer service. They were always efficient and professional, picking up and dropping off additional bins. I highly recommend their services. If you're doing a home reno, today is a great time to give the team at Local Waste a call or find them online at localwaste.ca. We decided that we're going to do a show tomorrow. It's important to us. It's Remembrance Day, November 11th. And so live at 8:30 Mountain Time, 10:30 Eastern, we're going to talk to historians and authors, Ted Barris and Don Levers. We're going to meet Stacey Barker and learn more about Canadian women in the World Wars. And former Globe and Mail correspondent Catherine O'Neill will join a medic, Stephen Ferry, whose story she told from southern Afghanistan, coming up tomorrow. We hope you'll join us.